Had a long week, Thanksgiving week. So I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. Everyone listening had a good Thanksgiving. Seems like there's lots of energy news over the last few days. Actually, speaking of John Arnold, he dropped this pretty badass list of just current energy trends over the last several years. Does anyone have that pulled up? I'd like to dive into that. Yeah.
How we have it.
How should we go about this? Should we just read off these?
Choose one or two of them to read.
Yeah. I think that the first one, Kirk's going to have some input on. It says, first off, he says, these are 23 random musings of the massive changes in the energy and climate in the U.S. over the past 5 years. The first one is clean tech VC went from disfavored to overpriced to something in the middle. This is the one that I liked. No more graphs with price of renewables going to zero. Hated that phenomenon on Twitter.
You know what mine was that I like, and the girlfriend and I were talking about this. He talked about interstate pipeline projects of any kind became uninvestable. So oil, gas, carbon. And I really think where that goes back to is the FERC changing their approval process.
Yes.
And Jeff Davies co-hosted BDE with me maybe 2 years ago when this happened, and we talked about it. And I'll get this wrong, but basically what happened is Biden was allowed to appoint a Democrat, which gave him 3-2. Joe Manchin had always been the block on that because he's from an energy state. He gave up his block for something, a pipeline or something, whatever it was, part of a bigger deal. So the 3-2 immediately changed. And now the FERC has to consider climate change goals when approving a project. And it seems like that's just ground everything to a halt, because even if you had a pipeline that was leaking 10 million a day of methane into the atmosphere, and you could put a new pipe in that's 0.0001 unit of methane being leaked, the FERC still has to say, no, that 0.001 unit of methane being leaked, that leads to climate change.
So they don't look at it in a contextual
it's not a
basis. They only look at it in a vacuum.
They don't have to, I guess.
I mean,
it's the point.
It's almost first world problems. I mean, we have so much energy security in this country.
Yeah.
That these debates are almost, I mean, the rest of the world, you got, Japan that's, trying to do these long-term LNG contracts like other European countries, because they're worried about energy security. We have energy security.
Yeah.
And so the pipeline issue is really interesting because it's through the context of the lens that, hey, we have so much, we're so abundant in energy. Now our prices are increasing because we can't get more oil and gas exported, and we can probably be even more secure financially.
Yeah.
But
we're kind of,
let's keep going.
Yeah. We're kind of nitpicking on.
If you don't have that, like,
India announced recently that they plan to double underground coal production. That's the response. They're either priced out of it or don't have the natural gas infrastructure, right? That's where this is going in very significant parts of the world.
I mean, I've been to India quite a few times. I know there's some oil off the coast, but they don't have anything in the country. So they're screwed. They have a lot of trash, which I know one of the facilities that I used to work at, we had a new technology to take trash and create fuel out of it. But they have coal. I mean, it makes sense for them to do it, especially with a country that's trying to grow as fast as China.
The point is, one of the other, I thought one of the most stunning fundamentals is that electricity demand is growing for the first time in 15 years. That sounds like stating the obvious, but as we've been talking about the pressure that's being put on the grid, that's a pretty important one.
Yeah.
And that rate of growth, just given the profile of demand changing and tipping toward more to do with data centers, et cetera, is pretty interesting to contemplate.
We're not going to, we'll post this, John Arnold's tweet on the show, right?
Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
I'm also probably going to write a
because if I take all 23 of these, I keep, every time I do it, I'm like, oh yeah, we talked about that.
We've talked
about all these things.
We've talked about all these things. Well, I was looking, he talks about the creation of two industries. He said electricity storage became an industry, carbon capture became an industry, but point 17, rebirth of domestic manufacturing related to energy transition. I mean, how many times have we talked about that on the show of co-location of manufacturing?
We're way ahead of that.
Yeah,
I think.
That's what we've been ahead of a lot of that stuff. And so I'm probably going to I was just thinking about this as I was looking through that. It's like, I'm going to write a blog post and go through each one of these points, give some commentary, and then go back and look at where we talked about it. But John, I love the way that John Arnold thinks, because I love how he just sits down and thinks about, hey, over the last 5-10 years, what are the things that we've seen, and just go. And I'm sure that we could add even more to that if we sat down and thought about it.
Sounds like a couple may be good for Freck Slapped.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Is this time to a public service announcement? Because fans have written in and they're confused because, Collin, you don't speak with enough
gusto.
That's what I was told on LinkedIn, that I either need to sit closer to the mic or bring more
time
gusto.
to man up. Do you see those cauliflower ears you've got?
Apparently, they're telling me to say it with my chest. And so I'm trying to sit really close to the microphone right now because I don't want to get called out on LinkedIn. But anyways, so what else?
What's interesting, if you just to kind of like close out John Arnold's tweet, and everybody should read it, is it feels like the absolute absence of science was used on a lot of these, but the other half of his 23 we're now realizing that science matters. That's what I was struck with when I was sitting there.
I liked his ones, and one point was about higher interest rates, dismantling big renewable projects. It's actually, kind of helping shale. Shale realizes that it has a methane problem. This is something that we talk about on Oil and Gas Startups podcast all the time. New technologies that are being deployed for methane mitigation. And then I thought one interesting point on there was he talked about oil and gas companies realizing that we've hit peak shale and acting like it. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that one.
I mean, John's a trader by nature. He's taking bets. I think we should use this list almost annually and just go back to it and be like, these are it's a 5-year view, but I think one of the things we always make predictions, but this would be actually a pretty good list to come back and revisit.
Yeah. See how it
have you ever gone to Raymond James's annual dinner they do around NAPE? Marshall Atkins.
I think I've been to Raymond's house and James' house, but not Raymond James.
But what Marshall always does is he does his macro presentation, and it's always, he starts with, here's last year's presentation, here's in red what I got right and what I got wrong. And he goes through each one of it, and you could see that. Okay, here are the 23 things. Okay, that changed this year, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
This one, check, still the same.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's purposeful in doing this, but I love just the list. But as I sort of looked at this list, because we're going to talk about it, he definitely hits on the financial and investment trends.
Mm-hmm.
He hits on energy policy and market dynamics. He hits on technological and industrial developments, and he hits on energy infrastructure and reliability. And then he hits environmental and strategic considerations with the SPR. It's interesting how he categorizes it. I mean, I don't know if that's how he categorized it in his mind.
Yeah.
But he kind of looked at the holistic
yeah.
view of the energy landscape, and he did a pretty damn good job of encapsulating all the sort of major thesis points.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of things that I would have added. I would have definitely said something about electricity demand from data centers, whether it's Bitcoin mining or
Absolutely.
GPU clusters. I think that that's one of those things that you look on that list 5 years from now and you're like, man, we probably still underestimated the impact that that has.
That's the subtopic under 13, which is, you know, we've had this resurgent growth in electricity demand in the US. That's how you could unpack that.
Yeah, that's a sub bullet point.
But I think it stands on its own too.
Yeah.
As we've talked about over the last several weeks and months.
Well, he's not going there. He's not going to go there, but we've gone there is sort of this, who's driving energy usage? It's big tech. I mean, that's not something John Arnold's going to go. He's not going to go against his friends at the breakthrough energy or whatever, whatever the fund's called.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think it's going. I mean, actually, I'm pretty sure he's an LP in that, but
he is. He said it.
Yeah, but also, I don't think it's going again. I mean, that's just statement of fact, right?
I know, but you can't always, I
don't think that's going against him. I don't think it's a bad thing either to use energy. Like, we should embrace using energy. And so, yeah, I think
was it Ben Shapiro that says don't let my facts get in the way of your feelings or something like that?
Well, the peak shale comment, I think, provides a lot of material for both short and long term, because we've seen a watershed deal in the form of Exxon and Pioneer betting on an extension of productivity improvement continuing far out into the future, and that's a unique set of assets, but it's also of scale enough to be representative for at least one of the subbasins. So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to watch, because Exxon, did imply that a big part of their synergies that they're looking to capture from the deal are in the form of improved recoveries.
Yeah.
And there was some comment around the notion of actually doubling those.
I mean, it's fascinating to me when you hear, Mark, you may know these numbers off the top of your head. I don't, but when you hear how much oil we leave in the ground from these horizontal wells, I mean, it's just kind of staggering. We capture or recover very little of it.
You're in high single-digit recovery factors.
Yeah.
And, getting to 2x that, it's just the nature of the rock, but, more stimulated rock volume, more you mobilize.
Yeah.
Can you get a doubling of that? And to be fair to Exxon, not to kind of go back too far and beat that topic into the ground, they didn't really qualify as to that doubling of recovery being a function largely of going from 2 to 4 mile laterals, or actually doing a better job of more precision in terms of geosteering and stimulation design, all that. So
yeah,
it's just going to be really interesting to watch, because as you all know, the industry copies and learns and applies pretty well.
To get out on this topic, let's all name one thing 5 years from now that's going to be on the list. Kirk, you're up.
Oh, great. Throw me first.
Hell yeah. I need time to think.
I mean, I'm going to take the number one, since we didn't really talk about, but cleantech VC went from disfavored to overpriced to something in the middle. Energy technology is energy technology is energy technology.
Yeah.
In 5 years from now, I think you're going to see this ebb and flow of people from sort of the West Coast that want to play in the environment and energy, but ultimately it's for the adults in the room. And I think you're going to see a flight to quality, and you're going to see sort of investments moving towards projects that really make sense, like carbon capture, technologies that actually produce cleaner fuels, things that actually make sense for energy transition versus, I'm laughing because one of the companies that I argued against not investing in is a hydrogen electric powered airplane. They just raised an additional funding. I'm like, there's some things that I think are just so long term out there that investors are going to start shying away from over the next 5 years.
Yeah,
flight to quality.
I love that you distinguish the difference between clean tech, climate tech, energy tech. Our energy tech podcast. That's why I was against naming it climate tech podcast, because I'm like, really, energy tech is energy tech, and that's what we care about. And I think you look at, we've talked about it on the show some, but Diamondback Energy made a $20 million placement in Verde Clean Fuels, and Verde's got a technology where you're taking methane essentially, and they're using that as feedstock for renewable fuels. And you start seeing like those things. Diamondback's not stupid, and they know how to also leverage their engineering and assets and infrastructure as well to help them. And so you're going to start seeing a lot more of those projects that make sense, as you said. And, Kirk's on the kind of ground floor of this too right now. I mean, raising, capital and building startups and just seeing the shift that's happening in the market. I mean, it's definitely cooled off compared to where it was 2 years ago. And, I think that's evident. We talked about it last week with like Helion just getting, these clean tech SPACs, EV SPACs just getting completely obliterated. And so it definitely seems that it's cooled off.
So what's your 5-year forecast? Take one of the bullets.
Take one of those.
Either that or something that's going to be a bullet, whatever.
I mean,
we're not talking about bullet as in JFK bullet.
No, we covered that last week.
Speaking of, I watched the JFK documentary last night. We just had a big discussion before we got on the podcast about it. If you haven't watched it,
I don't want to take a bullet. That's all I'm saying.
So I think,
or two for that matter.
Yeah. I'm not going to pick one. I'm going to pick a spectrum of them. What I'm really focused on is the data center thing. I've been fortunate. I get to talk to a lot of people in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I think that it's fucking cool that we're seeing this intersection where energy and tech are kind of coming to this point of singularity. And I think that that's going to kind of be a fascinating space to watch. One thing I didn't see on there was domestic.
Hey, so I'm going to cut in real quick because one of the things I was going to say is that we were going to see independent power plants powering data centers literally off the grid, or maybe connected to the grid just for backup.
That'll play out.
And mine was a subset of that.
I think y'all stole my point, but go ahead.
Okay, that'll piggyback on my third. The second one is domestic lithium production. That was something that I don't think I saw on his list. Our friend Mike Umbro thinks that you give it 5 years, Exxon's going to completely pull out of their Smackover project. He thinks that lithium prices are going to crash and that those wells are going to be uneconomic. That's his hot take. I don't see lithium prices crashing just because of the limited supply of it. But I do think that we'll see a lot more movement towards, some of these kind of alternative lithium supply plays. The third one is, which is something I talk a lot about, kind of piggybacking off of Chuck, is co-location of manufacturing with energy assets. I was telling Chuck as we were driving across Texas, I can't remember where it was, but there's a nat gas peaker plant. And next to that peaker plant, you have 3 warehouses. They're probably each 100,000 plus square feet, maybe 300,000 square feet each. Huge. And that's what the future looks like to me, is manufacturing plants, data centers, onshoring and co-locating with energy assets. And so I just don't see any way that, all 3 of those things are all going to be growing trends over the next 5 years.
Mark, what are you adding to the list? Or
just building on that, I think despite what happened in NuScale, we're going to see the building wave again of small modular nuclear reactors because of the features they offer, the reliability and low to zero carbon. And I think that it's more than commercial opportunism. I think it has a lot to do with the strategic intent of the government, in that chip manufacturing is going to be, and data center construction or build out and operation is going to be an increasingly important strategic weapon. Just as I said several months ago, that I believe natural gas send out will be the same thing. But I think, SMRs get a bit of a shot in the arm because of our intentions relative to tech, data centers, and chip manufacturing. Well, that goes hand in glove with the co-location of energy assets. I think what's interesting
is, lately we've been talking about how tech has the political clout, and that needs to be leveraged around the data center conversation. But also, if you look at SMRs and these small modular reactors, you have Sam Altman backed this company's name, Okla, I think it is. It's an SMR, or it's a fusion technology. Sam Altman from OpenAI backed that, and I'm pretty sure he's very involved with it from an operational perspective too. So now you're starting to see, one of those items on John Arnold's list was a decrease in the resistance against nuclear. And so you're starting to see people in tech who have all this political clout start to push nuclear energy, and a lot of them are going down the fusion route. Does fusion play out in the next 10 years like everyone says it does? I don't speculate.
I don't know, but just a side note on that deal. Sometimes deals, when I was at Shell, sometimes deals get to you through like executives, or like, will you look at this deal? So the deal got to my desk, and so I called a guy, and I'm like, what's up, man? He's like, dude, this is so top secret. You know, I can tell you, but then I'm gonna have to kill you. Like, you're gonna have to sign NDA and then another NDA. I'm like, what are you doing again? It's like, it's nuclear, but I can't tell you anything about it. I'm like, oh gosh, you must be from Silicon Valley. He's like, yeah, we got all the big guys in. He drops names.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is so exhausting.
Yeah.
When you raise money from like engineers from the oil patch, they're humble.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, man, yeah. And you kind of almost question their scientific chops because they're like, oh yeah. And you almost feel like they made it with like, you know, twine and some scissors.
Yeah.
But they know their shit.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go to like Silicon Valley, these people are like, dude, we're the best. We've invented nuclear. I'm like, no, you didn't.
Well,
it's crazy.
There's a big disconnect between bits and atoms, right? And what has Silicon Valley been really geared towards over the last 10, 15, 20 years is bits and much less atoms. Actually, most VCs won't even invest in anything hardware related. And so, you know, tons of brilliant people out in Silicon Valley, but
it's up to Chucky now.
So here's what we're going to be talking about in 5 years from now. Not on John's list. We have kind of defaulted to this point power generation to the big utilities in America, the grid operators, etc. You're going to see a rise of a private equity class on par with what we've seen in VC and what we saw with private equity, oil and gas, and what they did for the shale revolution. You're going to see that in power because that's going to be the only way to solve the problem.
When Texas deregulated, the birth of Tenaska, and like that's when private equity went wild with building all these private equity backed power plants. So actually, that's a great point, John.
Yeah, we're going to have to see that to fix the
I
problem,
think you're right,
because it will not be done by the utilities. No offense to our friends at NextEra or any of the others, but it's not going to happen.
I have one more to add that I don't think was on that list, but the rise of bidirectional virtual power plants, you know, utilizing these distributed energy resources, whether it's solar at a house, feeding that back into the grid. You know, Tesla has a big deal out in California. And, you know, you have startups like David Energy that are now utilizing it here in Texas. And to me, that makes all of the sense in the world. I know there's misaligned incentives across the supply chain essentially, but man, if you think about it, you know, being able to have solar at your house, a battery wall, potentially even an EV, and utilities paying you for any energy that you're storing and being able to distribute that and help with load balancing and peak demand, that seems like the future to me.
So I'm back to startup that's ahead on this space. It's called local. I mean, at the end of the day, energy should be produced and consumed locally. It's the most efficient.
Yeah.
Europe actually has pretty sophisticated self-consumption laws. There's some already laws in the European Union around how to actually settle and what do you do with power locally. It's coming. California has been looking at this. I think there's a lot of work. It's regulatory is the big reason why it's not working today. But you're right. I actually think it's really local energy consumption. Why doesn't, let's say Boulder, for example, University of Colorado, they have a big power plant on their university.
Yeah.
Well, when they have excess power, why can't they feed the neighborhood? And when the neighborhood generates excess solar, why can't they feed it back into his neighborhood?
Or like you look at like HEB builds these little micro power plants. They have these huge nat gas turbines.
You're right.
It's like, why can't HEB be a little peaker plant and put electricity back
the tariff
into the
problem
grid?
hasn't been figured out. That's the biggest issue. And
I still think it's bigger that the existing monopoly that runs the wires claims, you're going to blow up my grid if you do that.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean,
yes.
that's big problem number one. And engineers need to be brought by the government together to say, no, you're not going to blow up your grid, guys.
Well, you know what the problem is?
Our grid's blowing up anyway.
You want to know what the problem is? I was talking to a renewable company the other day. This is verbatim. I'm not making this up. And They said, yeah, one of the big issues right now is that all the top tier engineering talent is still in thermal generation, and renewables and utilities get the B team. So I haven't posted that out on Twitter because I don't want to hurt any feelings, but there it is on the BDE podcast, straight from the horse's mouth.
Can I ask just one question on this post from Arnold? Number 5, GOP politicians broadly acknowledge global warming from human activities.
Define GOP.
Well, that's where I was like, maybe I haven't been paying attention. Is that true?
Yeah.
I'm not the guy to ask.
Yeah.
I guess we're just not in that. Like, I'm not in that flow, or what?
I would trust John. I mean, John is obviously very involved in DC, and so I would, he probably has some pulse.
The backlash backlash from when Lee Raymond said what he said. I think you've seen, generally speaking, right-wing politicians walk that back.
The issue is, or the third rail is, whether or not you believe it's a direct and primary cause of climate catastrophe, right?
Yeah, because we were talking about that.
I think there's general agreement in whether that's good for the camera and good for the party to say, yes, there is some contributing factor. The question is degrees of severity and catastrophe. And so I think there's still...
we should do about it.
Right, what should we do?
Did y'all see the video I posted talking about the 5 extinction events? Did y'all see this? No? Yeah, I didn't get very many views. But anyways, it was a badass video. So it's this narration and like 30-second clip walking through the 5 extinction events. And I posted on Thanksgiving, and I was just hey, just a reminder that someday you're...
that was a cool video.
No, yeah, it was awesome. I said, just a reminder that someday your descendants are going to die a terrible death from climate change. So be thankful that you live in one of the most stable and habitable times in the Earth's history. Like, you got to have some perspective of, me and Mark were talking about this before we got on the show, is that, life for humans isn't guaranteed on this planet. And, hopefully we figure out a way to mitigate climate change and or habit other planets, but we're one asteroid away from all being wiped out here. So also keep some perspective.
Good thing that dinosaurs had a carbon tax. COP?
So the OPEC Secretariat issued an open letter this morning ahead of COP in response to the latest in a series of reports issued by the IEA, which was preceded by a tweet from the IEA's executive director, Fatih Birol. All of this timing is certainly coinciding with the kickoff of COP, I believe, in the next couple of days, and basically calling out the oil and gas industry and suggesting that very strongly suggesting that the oil and gas industry faces a moment of truth and a binary choice, either to continue contributing to the problem of emissions and emissions-related climate change, or shifting hard and spending more in renewables. And the OPEC Secretariat issued a 2-page strong rebuttal to that, and basically covered all the things that we've talked about in terms of affordability, sustainability, accessibility, et cetera, reliability, and consigning billions of people to perpetual life or perpetual state of energy poverty. And so it's this vilifying the oil and gas industry that certainly OPEC and others have taken a bit of exception to. And I responded to a certain tweet this weekend that was basically taking the executive director to task by saying that I believe it's actually the IEA that may be facing the moment of truth here as they head into COP28. And if you look at results of recent elections like in Argentina and the Netherlands, those were in part a referendum on top-down net zero policies, and more importantly, the cost to consumers and the electorate, that these things have immediately increased the burden upon the electorate, which for a politician is not a great situation to be in. I also think, even though it was, as I read it, it was never on President Biden's schedule, he is not appearing at COP28, which I think given the crescendo of things that we've had around the issue of climate change and the IRA, that for him not to make an appearance this year heading into 2024
well, I think
is a pretty important kind of symbolism here.
This is completely anecdotal and probably, a little bit biased, small sample size, but to me, it seems that COP is losing a little bit of its influence and gravitas, because I've seen 2 or 3 comments on Twitter from my friends who are in climate or climate tech, and one of their tweets stands out to me because he's like, when I first got into climate, my mentality was, oh, COP's happening, I gotta cover it. He's like, now he's like, I don't give a shit. It doesn't matter. Like none of it matters. And so you're starting to see these people that are like 5 years into climate, energy, and have these realizations of some of these things actually don't.
So it tracks the trajectory of NAPE, because if you think about it, COP is supposed to have record turnout this year, 70 some odd thousand people there and all. But the true insiders are going, shit doesn't get done there. It's a cocktail party. That's NAPE.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally.
Well, there will be a series of the obligatory tweets about count the private jets and the carbon footprint, et cetera. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to turn into, I think, a bit of a melee and fairly chaotic in terms of the rhetoric.
This tweet from the guy at the IEA, just you see the bias right off the bat with their wording that they use. This is the moment of truth for oil and gas, or however they framed it. And I haven't talked about this publicly, but I was told.
Please not with gusto.
I was told
with gusto,
with no gusto. I was told twice over the last couple months that representatives of the Department of Energy couldn't come speak at Fuse because they've been instructed not to be involved with anything that touches oil and gas. That shows you how politicized this is, that the Department of Energy doesn't want to be associated with oil and gas. And it's kind of infuriating to be honest. And, I could see it coming from IEA. But when it comes from, federal institution, government institution, you think that you need to be pragmatic and
IEA
factual.
Was kind of a leading indicator here because IEA is was fundamentally designed to provide objective policy leadership and be the best in the world in terms of data, energy data and analysis, and shaping policy and policy leadership around that. But they've clearly picked winners and losers here, right? It's pretty clear why.
Yeah.
Because of the money involved.
Yeah.
But I do think the moment of truth, and I think that was a very high risk thing for Dr. Birol to put out there, just given some of the shifts politically that we've seen, where we've had these, as I describe them, top down, in some cases forced net zero policies. Look at Germany. Look at, we covered some anecdotes from Europe this summer. Both you and I, Chuck, were over there, and there was a palpable pushback among the rank and file that, these things are becoming real in terms of burdens on me for my livelihood and my ability to afford my standard of living, right? Yeah. So I think that's the moment of truth, really, as I described it, is probably a little bit more shifting toward the moment of truth for the IEA.
They've got to have a better solution than let them eat cake. I mean, I think it's becoming more and more apparent.
Mark,
my favorite COP story, though, is Sultan Al-Jaber. I think I'm pronouncing this correct. Who's the president of this whole thing from the UAE? He had memos that got exposed of the 15 oil and gas companies he was going to meet with while he was there to work on oil and gas deals. So
there's an underground NAPE going on in COP28.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's better than private jet.
But this is not, I mean, let's look at what's happening around the world. I mean, we talked Germany, we talked the election in Netherlands, the election in Argentina.
The UK Prime Minister's been talking about
Prime
pushing
Minister,
back electric vehicles.
I mean, the fight,
mandates.
if you think about energy security versus net zero, it's bouncing back to energy security because of people just can't afford things.
Yeah.
And it almost makes you in awe in some ways of the Chinese, how they've been head down. And when they come to the U.S. and meet with our president, who's all about net zero, they meet in San Francisco. I mean, it is amazing how they're sort of just outmaneuvering everyone on sort of, the political spectrum as well as the energy security spectrum, because their coal is abundant and they're building coal and they continue to build coal and they know that. And lead the energy transition because all the supply chain is
they own it.
They own it all.
Yeah, no, it's like
it's unbelievable.
It's very worrisome how much we're getting outplayed.
It's gonna come
on
to
all
roost
fronts
at some point.
Yeah.
Which makes just diatribing on this. Did you read Blackman's? You read his piece on Substack? But he had a picture of sort of 4 key politicians that are all against gas stoves. They want to go to electric.
Oh yeah,
they were all posing with gas stoves.
They're all posing this holidays with what they're making on gas stoves.
I told Chuck because I bashed on Elizabeth Warren's last year, and I think I was the first one to see it. She posted that picture. No one had posted it, but I just saw the grating on top of the stove. Like you couldn't even see
Oh, we know it's gas because I looked.
All I need is a little corner. I can see what it is.
I think one of them you could see the ring of blue flame.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. One had that. Yeah. It's.
I told Chuck that that's gonna become a thing where these politicians they won't take a picture from now on with their gas stove in the back.
I don't actually think they're worried about it because it doesn't apply to them.
Well, yeah. I mean, the cognitive, ability to just not give a shit. I don't understand how politicians operate that way. But Mark, I was also going to tell you that I got invited, and this is probably an open invite if we ever, all 4 of us want to go do it. But I won't say the university's name, but the university was like, every year we go over to Europe and we challenge the, IEA's assumptions. And we would love for y'all to follow us and record content in a podcast of us doing that.
We should absolutely.
We should do it.
Man, that's a big resounding we.
Yeah. And we.
Yeah.
We.
So,
well, fuck these students. Let's stick Mark on them. So I'll reach out and I'll make that happen.
So real quick, OPEC, what are they going to do?
Rory Johnston had a good tweet at the end of last week saying, all the hair pulling and hand wringing about the uncertainty and the elevated volatility in crude because of the OPEC, background noise and then the postponement of the meeting. Crude finished off last week 0.04%. Right. So it sounds like heading into the rescheduled meeting, which starts at 1300 GMT on Thursday, that they're getting closer to a compromise with the, I don't want to say renegade, but there's a collection of unnamed African countries. This all has to do with, I guess, the top of the cartel doing a little bit more arm twisting about bringing production into more alignment with quotas, but also reducing some quotas.
Yeah.
Because it's obviously in Russia and Saudi's best interest to buoy pricing here, certainly in the Brent 80 territory, maybe closer to 90. Keep in mind that Brent was at 98 at the end of September. So flirting with sub 80 is a pretty big degradation or erosion in a very short period of time. And so it sounds like they're getting their stuff together. I think crude's trading pretty well today. It was holding in around 80 on the Brent side. So, we'll see. I think what the long history of OPEC meetings and observers and watchers and prognosticators have proven is that we're all mostly wrong about what's happening in the meeting and what comes out of it. But it seems like they're getting to a more constructive place than they were a few short days ago. And that meeting, again, is on.
Appreciated that you said that we're all wrong about it. I always laugh at Mel Kiper and his fantasy football. I'm like, imagine having a job like where it just doesn't matter and you sit there and you like analyze things and like make up stuff. That's how I feel about oil and gas analysts too. Like no one really knows what the fuck's going on. Just sitting there guessing.
Dan Pickering used to say when he ran research in one of the organizations I worked in, I won't mention any names, but our leader was, the institution's leader was prone to making provocative statements about global oil and gas markets. And Dan used to say, that's great, but we have to be right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so
we always talked about oil forecasts and all that. They're either right or they're wrong.
Can be said for any.
They're never precisely right.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if there's a 75% probability.
Can be said for any model or forecast.
It's either up or down.
So Mark, just as we head into the winter of our discontent, if this becomes a cold winter, what will happen with OPEC? And I was just looking that European gas storage is at 99% full compared to a 5-year seasonal average of 88%. So Europe seems to be preparing. Japan's preparing for long-term LNG imports. What's going to happen if if it gets super, cold AF this winter?
Well, keep in mind that you're still missing a good chunk of the European supply picture. It's great that storage is full, but you still have
the wind's going to blow.
Have a lot of gas offline from Russia. That last winter, the combination of a mild winter and the ability to shift pretty hard to get spot cargoes that were bid up. Germans spending $800 million on floating LNG and emergency coal supplies. We'll see. I think the anticipated El Nino winter, portends some pretty significant upside price risk. And, we could start drawing inventories pretty quickly. I've seen the 99 point whatever percent full, but in terms of where demand could go relative, certainly to last winter, I think we could put pressure on supply demand balance pretty quickly.
Wouldn't it be great to be a trader at Trafigura that's sitting, watching, and waiting for all this, just the shit to hit?
No, because I'd have a heart attack probably daily. I wasn't built for that.
Hopefully, I don't know if you guys saw Permian Highway had a force majeure. There was forget which compressor station. They had a pretty significant leak, and I think it was about 12:20 this morning. They went into force majeure and canceled nominations for tomorrow, and so had to shut in to do root cause and then
force majeure applies to a leak.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Damn.
And I don't know if that had anything to do with kind of breaching the statutory methane emissions limits, but I suspect there's some of that in the decisions to declare force majeure.
I have a topic I want to bring up.
Yeah, this is our last topic.
I was playing golf this weekend, and I noticed there's all these Canadians down here. We don't talk enough about like what's happening in Canada and all the oil and gas there.
Oh, dude, I talk about this all the time. But go on.
But these are it was a drilling contractor and some guys that's suppliers.
Yeah.
But one of the guys like 6'7".
Yeah.
And the guy next to me goes, "Hey, he played professional hockey." I'm like, No, he didn't. I'm like, "Dude, there's no way you played hockey." He's like, "Yeah, I did." He's like, I was like, "Defensive course." Like, yeah. I was like, these small guys, I was thinking of you, Collin. I was like, these small, fast skaters, like, don't they just skate around big guys? He's like, "No, dude, my reach is so long, they can't get around me." I'm like, I got to see that. It just doesn't make sense to me. I just wanted to throw out a little Canada.
I mean,
I've
I broke out on Canadian drilling rigs, and so they moved all the rigs onto West Texas, so I learned how to drill from Canadians. And
Really?
So it was this weird dynamic because, I mean, you want to talk about like two prideful, high ego types of people. It's Canadians and in West Texas, oil field hands clashing. And so there's a ton of...
this all about?
Was this... So you attempted to buy the 30-pack in Canada, or was that?
No, it was in West Texas. It was in Midland. It's how far safety cultures come for oil and gas. Yeah, bought a 30-pack and then smashed it on the rig while working. I've got a video of my second day on the rig. everyone's out there in shorts, flip flops, no shirts, no hard hats, drinking beers, just drilling holes. It's back in the glory days.
Oops.
Yeah. So, all right. Any thank you for bringing up the Canadians and
God, we're gonna get flamed all week.
yeah. Anything else before we end it out?
As Denver, but anyway.
Damn, that's what'll get us.
Dude, not
out.
even, man. No way.
All right.
Not unless you want to share some of your weekend adventures.
No, I didn't really have. Oh yeah, I did. I mean, I had a good weekend. No, I got a comment on LinkedIn that we've got a lot of new listeners to the show over the last few weeks. And anyways, I got a comment over on LinkedIn that said that they've been listening to our show the past couple weeks, and it's a must listen to them now. But I need to either sit closer to the mic or bring more gusto. So hopefully I brought the gusto today, or talk louder, or maybe it's just a technical issue. Something's wrong with my mic, but we'll figure it out. But excited that we're getting new listeners. So appreciate everyone that's sharing the show, sharing it with a friend. If you guys ever have any feedback for us, let us know. Send us a message, LinkedIn, Twitter, find us online. We'll catch y'all next week.